I'd like to ask Tambra Stevenson of WANDA, Ronnie Webb of the Green Scheme, and Chris Bradshaw of Dreaming Out Loud to join the stage for our next panel on farming practices and nutritional density. And as they make their way up and get comfortable, I'd like to ask everyone here that if you don't already subscribe to our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. I get to interview amazing leaders, some of whom you'll be hearing from today, who are really shaping our food and agriculture systems in so many different ways. So again, it's Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So thanks to my panelists. I'm so glad to see you all again. Wish I could be there with you. And I just want to dive right in because we're already over time with this amazing event. So Chris Bradshaw, if I could start with you, I want to ask, what is, for some, it might be an uncomfortable question, but it's one that needs to be asked. And I'm wondering if you can help the audience understand the ways that racist practices and policies have really disenfranchised particular communities in Washington, D.C., and why you and Dreaming Out Loud have called for a really holistic approach and comprehensive reparations to solve these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. In our work, we really focus on racial and economic justice as the frame and food as the lens through which we examine these sensitive topics, sensitive to some, but pertinent to our communities. In this region, before the pandemic, white wealth was 81 times that of black wealth. And presumably, if you had some wealth, many folks, through the loss of income, had to dip into those resources just to survive the pandemic. And so we're looking at a deep structural issue that has developed over time through the process of either harmful intentionally or neglectful public policy that has shaped those circumstances. And when you look at the depth of that challenge, though we love the work that we do and I respect and love and really would like to give my friends their flowers as it relates to the incredible work that they do day to day, but it's really a drop in the bucket. The United Nations estimates that black folks are owed $14 trillion in reparations. $14 trillion. To frame what that looks like, the United States GDP in 2021 was $23 trillion. China was $17.7 trillion. So we're talking about a scale that we need to reach to be able to holistically repair our communities across the whole spectrum of American life, whether that's the trauma of what we've suffered, the educational disparities, maternal health. You look at any aspect of American life and you see it represented. And so we use food as that lens. We're situated at the farm at Kelly Miller in Ward 7, working to refurbish Fort Stanton Urban Farm in Ward 8. And as a food hub, we aggregate from farms from about 5 or 6 different states to get healthy food into our communities through the Black Farm CSA and our wholesale operations, making food, working to create jobs and forming incredible partnerships that help to do the work on the ground and help advance the ball, so to speak, but that have to be a part of a larger picture of more radical change in this country.
Absolutely. Here. Can we just give that a round of applause, everyone? Thank you. Chris, you bring up that these were neglectful public policies, and I think that's an important point to keep reiterating throughout the day, that these were policies that put place that the disparity and inequality between white folks and black and brown folks and other marginalized communities, including indigenous peoples, did not happen by accident. And Tambra, that leads me to you, and I'm wondering if you can talk about, to speak about the importance of addressing food apartheid through both race and gender. We've heard the term food desert earlier today, but it's really a system of food apartheid that has affected both black and brown folks and again, other communities and women specifically.
Thank you for that. First, I want to give Karen Washington her flowers for even coining the term food apartheid. Because as we know in medicine, if you do not have the proper diagnosis, you cannot get the proper prognosis. And what we have adopted in the DC Food Policy Council is food apartheid. Food desert, food swamp are really appendages to the body of food apartheid, which recognizes the structural barriers, systemic denial of access, and really shift of power to make powerless people. And we're here to say, we're here to take our power back. And so in the work of WANDA and what the pandemic really showed is that women have cared and labored and supported their families and the communities without proper compensation. So any program that you've seen around basic income programs is really only pennies to the dollar of what women are owed of doing the tireless work of the care economy that really creates the fabric of society to even be upheld in the first place. And so to the point that, thank you. And to the point that Chris mentioned about reparations, Michael Twitty, a great colleague, talks about culinary reparations, but I'm here to say women need their culinary currency that is flowing in our veins that have been denied, delayed, and deferred. And we are here to reclaim that because understanding that we have been hidden figures in the food system for too long. Our labor has been exploited, we have been extracted, and we have been erased from the narratives to the credits that have been given to white women who have made names of cookbooks that really were the recipes of Black women who labored in their kitchens down south, and to recognize that when we look at changing the narrative, we have to say that we are the food heroes that we've been waiting for. And so the work of WANDA really speaks to changing the narrative, to understand that we have always been resilient, we've always been resistant, but that's really what you do in the face of oppression. So the question is, what do we do in the face of thriving and not simply surviving? That is the world I wish to paint and reimagine, in the world that every Black woman and girl is not simply a consumer, but a producer. From Amanda Stevenson and Fresh Fruit Factory to Mary Blackford of Market 7 to Beverly Wheeler, who is of DC Hunger Solutions, we have Black women who are leading in the food system who simply need to get their due. And unfortunately, even in our own community, let me call the elephant out in the room, that internalized oppression affects us as well when we don't give credit to our own people. And so until we can change the narrative of recognizing that we should not be the bottleneck, we should not be the foot on the neck of our brothers and sisters, we will not change. We only perpetuate as the form of a performative plantation as that overseer in our communities. And we have to end the neocolonialism to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tambra. Round of applause, please. Tambra has taught me so much throughout the years, and I want to come back to something you said earlier about the hidden figures in culinary history. Our friend Tony Tipton Martin has become this culinary detective, uncovering those stories that you talk about and making sure that those women entrepreneurs for hundreds and hundreds of years are finally getting their due. And it's also because of people like you, Tambra. So thank you for calling that out and making us all really, at least understand a little bit of what has been stolen and what needs to be repaired. Ronnie, I'd like to turn to you now, and I talked to Che a little bit about this earlier, and we think of community gardens as, of course, places where food is produced, but they are also a form of self-empowerment and other other assets. And these gardens, provide so much more than just fresh fruits and vegetables. And I'm wondering if you can talk about why that's important, that it's not just the production part and the eating part, it's all of the other things that are happening as well.
Absolutely. One thing that I really love about these urban farms or urban garden spaces or community gardens, school gardens, I can give you a prime example. A lot of the work that we do at the Greenskin, we're focused east of the river, Ward 7 and 8. But we have a sweet spot for Ward 5, because that's where I'm from, right? And so we have a garden, the Langdon Park Youth Community Garden off Franklin Street. And in that garden, it's a waiting list to basically get a plot on there. And it's been a waiting list for a while. The other half of the garden, Greenskin runs youth programming in that particular garden space. What we've noticed is that this community is so-called, it was being gentrified, but what we've noticed is that a lot of the people who were formerly or living in the community weren't having access to those garden beds, right? That was one sort of like barrier, right? Second barrier was that it was a violence thing going on, a community safety thing going on. So it was all types of violence going on. The third thing is it was new residents and old residents, right? And so what these garden spaces did was broke those social barriers down. You had kids that weren't from the neighborhood who lived in the neighborhood for 10, 15 years now playing with kids who, you know, just moved to the neighborhood. Or you had seniors who didn't know none of the young people in the community, and now they're able to interact with those young people. That's one example. Another example is also just utilizing these spaces as educational outdoor classrooms. So we do that. That's what our job at the Green Scheme is to do. So we go to schools, we go to youth development sites, we go to public housing sites, faith-based institutions, and we build the gardens. We meet the community where they are, but we utilize these spaces more, especially in the urban ag space, as an educational classroom. And from that educational classroom, we're able to teach things like entrepreneurship, how to partner with a Dreaming Out Loud and go through the Dream Academy, the Dream program, to get your product as a resident, get your product at market, get the proper training and education. And so, like, I just keep saying at the Green Scheme, but I think just general, me and my colleagues, partners who I have a lot of honor for and respect for, you know, I think it boils down a lot to education. And if we can plant that seed in our lane, then we're able to move our community members to grow, to go and get a scholarship through the WANDA program or to go through the Dream program, to have more people that look like us, more people from the community that are using these spaces to break down a lot of these barriers.
Absolutely. And Ronnie, you mentioned that you and Chris's organization, Dreaming Out Loud, partner, and the education access aspect of this is so important. I want to address something that you mentioned, Ronnie, that I think is really important. It's this multi-generational education that's happening, because I think for so long, elders have been left out of these conversations, and they have a lot to learn from youth, and youth have a lot to learn from them. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how that works in both of your organizations, or all three of you. Tambra, I know this is something important to you as well. And again, sorry about my voice.
I think that's a good point. We've been able to do some things like on one of the first programs I'm proud of, the USDA believed in our idea and gave us and funded it, but it was a community foods program through NIFA. And what it was, we were working in a public housing site, the second biggest public housing site in DC. It actually is right beside Chris's food hub and urban farm, the Kelly Miller Farm. And we ran a program where we ran 2 days out of the week from 6 to 8. We ran a youth gardening family program where the kids would come in the garden, pick the herbs, plant water, maintain the garden while the parents were in there preparing a meal. And as the parents prepared the meal, the kids would bring different herbs that they can use. And we always had a subject matter that we talked about over a community dinner amongst folks. And so just imagine the union, the brotherhood, the sisterhood, just building a village, a community. That was a great space to use food, urban agriculture, to really break down some of those intergenerational barriers.
And to that point, in our work with WANDA, our WANDA Academy, we had women ranging from 18 to 70 that we took to Black women-owned farms, to Black women food retailers, and to be able to understand that really all we need is already right here. And that's part of the system, to believe that everything is outside of you. And we want to affirm you that within your sisterhood, your community, your foodways. And so we share that with the next generation through our WANDA books, by having little Wanda, her mama Wanda, auntie Wanda, nana Wanda, and papa Wanda, to know that it takes a community to raise a little Wanda. And that is the future of food. That is female. That is Wanda.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And right, she hit the nail right on the head when we talk about intergenerational exchanges and the role that women play, and the role that women play in the food system. I'm thinking of my team member, Zachary Curtis, who's not here today, who has been one of the critical thinkers and movers in the space as well. And one of the things that we talk about a lot internally at Dreaming Out Loud is that connectivity and what is lost when we aren't connecting our elders to our young people. It's not just the social connectivity, but it's also that transference of historical knowledge, whether it be growing practices or recipes, the things that we're losing. That's technology. You look at a seed that's thousands of years of human technology distilled down into a seed. And those seeds that we need to plant are those ones that, as Tambra mentioned, empower folks and remember, help them to remember their own power. We have folks that really know the fundamentals of farming and food. We have folks that are working to build enterprises that can support themselves and their families, and what is missing are those connections to the resources. When you listen to podcasts like, I'm a big fan of How I Built This, right? But one thing you listen to How I Built This, there's always this story about how I got an $80,000 loan from my brother. You know, and our communities don't have access to that type of resource. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is to bridge that gap. We were fortunate to be able to subgrant $120,000 to other Black farmers and food makers, again, highlighting our women farmers. Gail from Deep Roots Farm, Gail Taylor, was a recipient of the Nourish DC grant, which we're also playing a role in at Three Part Harmony Farm. So we want to continue to utilize not just private resources, but our public resources to really invest in that empowerment and break down the barriers that allow folks to forge their own path. There's a lot of potential in food as an economic driver. But one of the things we also need to do is disrupt the ownership and the cost structures. Dreaming Out Loud, we've been thinking about space of our own to be able to perform our work as a food hub. And you go out into the marketplace and you see $45 per square foot rents with triple net leases where you're paying the operating costs on top of that.
Absolutely.
How can you build out a sustainable food system where those barriers are so high? And again, that's just a wealth transfer from potentially small businesses to a developer and then a bank. We need to reverse that so we can invest in ourselves.
Chris, these are such good points, and I hate to interrupt. I want to mention two things. We're going to have to end this panel. Unfortunately, we are way over time. But you mentioned seeds as really the best and most important, and it's our oldest technology. And, you know, we have to recognize, especially as white folks, as someone like me, the inherent privilege that white folks have had in this space. And that really needs to end. So I'm so thankful that you brought this all up. I'm thankful to the three of you for the important work that you do, uplifting your communities and others and teaching all of us how to be really better humans in this space and how to learn from one another. It's work that is hard and often unrewarding, and I really applaud you all. So thank you all so much for being here today. Let's give them a round of applause.